Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. In Iraq, at least 42 people died and over 300 were wounded as police fired tear gas to disperse protesters in Baghdad. This brings the death toll to 197 since anti-government protests began earlier this month. More in this report. The demonstrations are the second phase of a week-long movement in early October, demanding an end to corruption and unemployment. Activists are urging more and more Iraqis to return to the streets.
We came today to put an end to such a humiliation. Enough. We want to live with the rest of the world. Saddam oppressed us for 35 years. We got to 16 years with these rulers. It means we have been suffering oppression for 51 years. We want a solution. We want to live. We want to live.
The United Nations has urged security forces to show restraint.
A UN human rights report released by UNAMI this week set out credible reports of violations of the right to life, including deliberate killings of unarmed protesters and the excessive use of force by units deployed to manage the demonstrations. The report also highlights concerns regarding the widespread use of repressive measures to limit publicly available information on the demonstrations.
In a bid to quell protests, Prime Minister Adil Abdul Mahdi says a ministerial reshuffle would take place next week, but he rejected the calls for government's resignation. Pakistan, China and Russia have called for the resumption of Afghan peace talks between the US and the Taliban. The representatives met US Special Envoy for Afghanistan, Zalmay Khalilzad, in Moscow. In a joint statement, they urged the warring sides to reduce violence to create a conducive environment for talks. The participants said they expect all the sides to maintain a ceasefire during intra-Afghan talks. They called on the Afghan government and the Taliban to release prisoners at the beginning of negotiations. They also said Afghan soil should not be used to threaten the security of any other country. Earlier, President Donald Trump called off the negotiations over the killing of a US soldier in Afghanistan. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has said the military alliance is fully committed to peace in Afghanistan. Speaking to reporters in Brussels, he said NATO will continue to support the Afghan security forces with training and funding. He said funding the Afghan forces will aid the fight against international terrorism and create the conditions required for peace. Stoltenberg said the Taliban need to demonstrate a real willingness to make real compromises to establish peace. He praised Afghan forces for the role that they played in election security, saying the next step is to allow the election results to be counted. The people of Indian-occupied Kashmir have strongly rejected the Indian ruling Bharatiya Janata Party in local elections. Despite being the only party contesting the polls, the BJP came second in the occupied valley and Ladakh. The Hindu Nationalist Party only got 81 council seats in all three occupied regions, facing defeat by independent candidates. The independent candidates won 217 out of the 307 seats. In 22 districts of occupied Kashmir and Jammu, the BJP only won 2 seats, while independents swept 19 seats. The occupied valley has been under curfew for the last 83 days. Twitter has blocked almost 1 million tweets on occupied Kashmir's situation on the behest of the Indian government. A report by the Committee to Protect Journalists says Kashmir-focused tweets have been censored since August 2017. The report said India has sent 53 letters to Twitter seeking complete or partial ban on 400 accounts in last 2 years. The report says 90% of the withheld accounts were from Kashmir Reference Group, hosting over 920,000 tweets. The occupied valley is under New Delhi's curfew and the communications blackout for the last 83 days. Another man has died in a detention camp for Indians declared foreigners by PM Modi's government in Assam. India published the National Register of Citizens list in August, stripping almost 2 million people of Indian citizenship. 70-year-old Paludas had been in detention camp in Lower Assam since July 2017. Officials say he was admitted to the hospital earlier this month after his health deteriorated. Thus, his family says he was declared a foreigner despite having all the documents. Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu says a German proposal to create an international safe zone in northeast Syria is not realistic. Addressing a news conference with German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas in Ankara, he said Turkey will not tolerate human rights violations in Syria. Ankara also rejected allegations by Amnesty and Human Rights Watch that Syrians in Turkey were forcibly repatriated and mistreated. In a statement, Foreign Ministry spokesman Hami Aksoy termed Amnesty's claims as unreal and fictional. He said Turkey hosts nearly 4 million displaced people, including over 3.6 million Syrians. Aksoy said Ankara lent a hand to refugees when many countries were building walls on their borders. The United Nations has urged countries fighting the war in Syria to begin discussing a way to end to the 8-year-long conflict. In a statement, Secretary General Antonio Guterres has praised the recent reduction in fighting in northeastern Syria. The UN chief said it is time for Syria to map a political way out of the war. Guterres said he is not aware of any ongoing conflict in northeastern Syria. He said the UN is committed to ensure the Syrian Constitutional Committee will begin its work in Geneva. Guterres said the global community should hold people who have committed crimes in the recent past accountable. Turkey announced a ceasefire after its deal with Russia on Operation Peace Spring. Russia has accused the US of international banditry after Washington announced its intention to protect oil fields in Syria. In a statement, Russia's defense ministry said Syrian hydrocarbon deposits do not belong to ISIS but to the Syrian Republic. Defense ministry spokesman Igor Konashenkov claimed the US smuggles oil from fields in eastern Syria to other countries. Konashenkov said the revenues from smuggled Syrian oil arrive at the numbered bank accounts of the US private military companies. He said the monthly revenue generated by smuggling Syrian oil exceeds $30 million. He said Pentagon is willing to guard oil wells in Syria from imaginary hidden cells of ISIS to secure a continuous financial flow. The European Parliament has rejected a plan to step up research and rescue operations for refugees and migrants in the Mediterranean. The motion was defeated by 299 votes to 288 in favor. The Parliament voted against the resolution, urging member states to improve efforts to rescue people from drowning in the sea. The majority of the votes against the motion came from the Parliament's largest centre-right group. Earlier, the UN said 18,000 migrants have died in the Mediterranean since 2014. In the United States, a court has ordered the Justice Department to hand over an unredacted copy of Robert Mueller's Russia investigation to the House committee. The ruling has underlined the legality of the Democratic-led impeachment inquiry against President Trump. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi welcomed the order, calling it a blow to President Trump's attempt to put himself above the law. The ruling will allow House investigators to see portions of the report involving Donald Trump Jr.'s meeting with the Russians. The judge has given the Justice Department until next week to provide the blacked out material from the report. The Justice Department argued that the redacted information cannot be disclosed as it contains highly confidential material. The judge strongly disagreed and subpoenaed the redacted portions of the Mueller's report. The US has released alleged Russian spy Maria Butina from a Florida prison after she served most of her 18-month sentence. Butina, who was convicted of conspiring to influence US conservative activists, has been deported to Russia. Butina's attorney, Robert Driscoll, said she was released from the prison for her good behavior. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has welcomed Butina's release. The Russian pleaded guilty in December last year to one count of conspiring to act as a foreign agent. In Chile, almost 1 million anti-government protesters have converged in Santiago in the country's largest ever protest march. Following a week of deadly protests, demonstrators are demanding economic reform and President Sebastian Pinera's resignation. More in this report.
Waving national flags, banging pots and bearing placards, protesters streamed to the streets in Santiago, urging political and social change. Many sang popular resistance songs from the 1970s, the era of Augusto Pinochet dictatorship. Protests that began last week over a rise in public transport fares has boiled into riots, killing 19 people and injuring hundreds. Authorities have deployed 20,000 soldiers using tear gas and water cannons to disperse the demonstrators.
I think the first thing the president has to do is to get the military off the street and change the cabinet, and that there are conscious people making statements to the country that are consistent with what people want.
Though serious incidents have decreased in recent days, the protests show no sign of ending.
The unity never before the Chilean people had protested in years of democracy in this way. You see that there are people from all kinds, elders, children, youth, workers and students, all united in the same cause.
In a tweet, the Chilean president Sebastian Pinera says he has listened to the people's message, saying, "We have all changed."
Welcome back. Voters in Argentina will head to the ballot box tomorrow in the presidential election. Opinion polls show center-left candidate Alberto Fernandez holding a 20-point lead. Fernandez defeated President Mauricio Macri in an August primary, sparking a market crash. Former President Cristina Kirchner is running mate for Fernandez, who is convincing voters that he has a plan to reboot the economy. To avoid a runoff, the leading candidate needs to secure 45% of the votes. Voters will be choosing between 6 candidates. Bolivia says it is open for a review of its presidential election results by the Organization of American States and the European Union. Bolivia's Electoral Tribunal head, Maria Eugenia, has invited outside bodies to audit the electoral process after violent clashes erupted over the vote. The OAS has called on Bolivia's election tribunal to hold the second round runoff vote between Morales and his top challenger, Carlos Mesa. The recommendation has been supported by the EU, Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, and the US. The Electoral Tribunal declared President Evo Morales' victory in the first round of the election held last Sunday. The opposition has protested the election results, claiming they are fraudulent. Thousands of people blocked the streets and lit fires in cities across Bolivia, calling for their vote to be respected. A Hong Kong court has banned people from disclosing the personal details of police officers and their families. The ruling has been made to prevent protesters from attacking police personnel. Police say many of its officers have had personal details leaked online, which has led to the harassment of their family members. Hong Kong's court was approached asking for an injunction preventing people from publishing personal information. The court has granted that injunction for 14 days. In months of protests, demonstrators have attacked police with petrol bombs and rocks. Police have responded with tear gas, water cannon, and rubber bullets. The world governments have pledged $9.8 billion in fresh financing for the Green Climate Fund to fight climate change. The fund was set up to help developing nations shift to a carbon-free economy. The fund's executive director, Yannick Glamarek, says the U.S. did not contribute. Glamarek said a number of donor countries have doubled their pledges to make up for the lost U.S. funds.
Countries have announced a contribution. 75% of these 27 pledges are an increase, and nearly half, 13 out of the 27, are actually a doubling of the contribution.
The United Nations says nearly 1 million people in South Sudan have been impacted by severe flooding. In a report, the organization said rains are likely to continue for another 4 to 6 weeks, putting more people at risk. The UN said severe floods have devastated large areas in the country since July. Floods have also forced hundreds of thousands to leave their homes. The report added that internally displaced refugees and their host communities have limited access to health facilities. The UN has anticipated considerable damage to crops, land and livestock that will exacerbate the ordeal for months to come. In Japan, 10 people have died in flooding and mudslides caused by torrential rains. Hundreds of residents are stranded at evacuation centers because rail and bus services have been suspended in northeastern parts of the country. Authorities say Chiba Prefecture has recorded the equivalent of months' rain in just 12 hours. They warned of more landslides and flooding despite the storm moving away from Japan. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has called for an all-out rescue effort, relief work and damage assessment. The region is facing its third heavy rainstorm in 6 weeks, just 2 weeks after the powerful typhoon Hagibis killed 88 people. In the U.S., wildfires raging in California have forced over 50,000 people to leave their homes. Officials say a number of buildings in the city of Santa Clarita have been destroyed. Heavy winds and warm weather fed the blaze overnight as it devoured parts of the city. The local weather department says another burst of high winds is expected over the weekend. A volcano on the French Indian Ocean island of Reunion has erupted for the 5th time this year and spewed lava for the 2nd time this month. Details in this report.
The Le Patron de la Fournaise is said to be one of the most active volcanoes in the world. The volcano on Reunion Island in the Indian Ocean began throwing up lava on Friday and continued into the weekend. It produced a spectacular light show for those who ventured out.
So we're in the enclosure by the lava road. We are 10 meters from the flow of lava. You can feel the heat. We are getting tanned by the heat.
Many describe the experience as amazing and something they would remember for life.
It's a bit scary, like the apocalypse. It is magnificent. It's great.
In the last 6 years, the volcano has erupted 15 times, attracting thousands of spectators on each blowout.
In New York City, a pop-up art show blending flowers and fashion has blossomed at the Hudson Yards. Organizing team Flowers DeVilles has cultivated flower events all over the world, but this is its first in New York. Details in this report.
It's not every day you visit a city and wind up in a tropical garden, wearing vibrant and fragrant flowers including roses, carnations, hydrangeas and tulips. The many of the life-size mannequins were designed around in Hudson complex of New York City.
We've got 14 beautiful mannequins here, all dressed in nothing but fresh flowers to stop people in their tracks, to engage, make people happy. Flowers make everybody happy.
Fleur de Villes co-founder Tina Barclay says it is a luxury brand, but it always works with local florists in each city to celebrate local floral talent.
The florists make their decisions around the flowers themselves, so they plan it, create it, design it, and then they procure the flowers to use in each of the exhibits.
The 10-day exhibition will run until November 3rd.
American businessman Bill Gates has become the richest billionaire with a net worth of $105.7 billion. The Bloomberg Billionaire Index says Gates passed Amazon chief Jeff Bezos to make the top spot. The Microsoft founder jumped the table as Bezos' net worth was cut by nearly $7 billion. Amazon stocks fell by over 8% after the e-commerce giant reported its first quarterly drop in profit since 2017. Bezos' net worth sank to $103.9 billion. In the meantime, Microsoft won a $10 billion 10-year contract with the Defense Department to build the military's war cloud. Amazon had long been seen as a frontrunner for the Joint Enterprise Defense Infrastructure cloud contract. The General Motors workers have ended a 40-day-long strike after approval of a new contract. The United Auto Workers Union strike cost General Motors around $2 billion. The strike was the longest in the car industry since 1970. It began in September with the end of union's contract with the car maker. The company has agreed to a 3% wage increase, maintaining health benefits and removing a cap on profit sharing with employees. The new agreement also includes a signing bonus and creates a clear path to permanent staff status for temporary employees. And now the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you may follow us on social media at Indus.News.